Up next, we have Mindy Patterson, and Mindy is the founder and president of the Cavalry Group, a private member-based company dedicated to protecting the constitutional and private property rights of law-abiding animal owners, animal-related businesses, and agricultural concerns across all across America by protecting members against illegal search and illegal seizure. Mindy and her husband have one daughter and reside near Guthrie. So with that, we'll welcome up Mindy Patterson. This is for the live.
Gotcha. Yep. Snazzy. Okay.
It makes it a little bit better.
And is this the way to go right here?
Yep, that'll work.
Oops. You know what? I'm going to do it this way. Is that good, Andy? Can you hear me now? Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, great. Well, everybody's sharing testimony about how they met Andy. And I met Andy when I was living in the state of Missouri. My husband and I moved here to Oklahoma 4.5 years ago, but we lived in Missouri for 25 years, and in the year 2010, the Humane Society of the United States came to our state with a ballot initiative called the Puppy Mill Cruelty Prevention Act. And I remember being at the campaign office, and I get a phone call from this sweet person from Oklahoma, Andrea Hutchison, and she wanted to talk about the egregious nature of this ballot initiative, which kind of blew me away because people in our own state didn't understand that it wasn't really about puppies, wasn't really about dogs. But Andy noticed immediately that this ballot initiative that had been dropped in the state of Missouri, we were fighting for our lives to defeat, and Andy got it. It was about coming right against our farmers and ranchers and our food producers, because it really had nothing to do with dogs. That was the emotional smokescreen and facade that they wanted to bamboozle the voters as they stepped into the voting booth and, marked yes for adequate food, shelter, water, humane care, exercise, veterinary care for dogs. It was written into the body of the legislation that the definition of pet, not dogs, definition of pet was any domesticated animal living near or around the house. Could be cattle, could be chickens, pigs. But Andy called because she was alarmed. She was sounding the alarm. So that state ballot initiative quickly became a national issue, and people were paying attention all over the country. So that was one of the benefits of going through that rough patch, that bumpy time, is that it does expose the truth. And Andy, you've been just such a great friend through the years, and we've been through a lot, you and I. So with that, I'm going to get started. As you all know, those who raise, breed, and work with animals have been revered and lauded for centuries. But in recent decades, people who raise, breed, and work with animals are in the fight for their very existence, including farmers and ranchers, landholders. They're using this ploy of animal rights to put up a smokescreen to fool people, to put forth an ideology that, we're not taking good care of our animals. They're basically trying to redefine what is considered humane through policy. So as the gentleman who introduced me, our organization, the Cavalry Group, advocates for animal owners and animal enterprise in the 48 continental states, legally, legislatively, and in the media. So while we do protect our members against unlawful search and seizure, we don't sit around and wait for the emergency number to ring. We are in the trenches literally every day, reading legislation, local, state, and federal, in the 48 continental states, and showing up in committee hearings to testify in opposition. So that's really at the core of what we're about and what we've been doing for going on 14 years now. So the animal rights movement is extremely aggressive. I'm sure some of you have seen this web before, and this is honestly tip of the iceberg. These animal rights groups come up with a new splinter group literally every day, almost every day. And they're little, micro groups that are offshoots of the Humane Society of the United States, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, Animal Legal Defense Fund, All these little groups, Global Animal Partnership, doesn't that just sound nifty? I mean, it sounds, some of these titles sound very benign, but they are humane in name only. They're very deceptive, and they get all their money, their hundreds of millions of dollars, by betraying Americans who love animals with their emotionally charged propaganda to influence them to open up their checkbooks and donate to these organizations. So they have hundreds of millions of dollars, just like the environmental extremist groups. But they have hundreds of millions of dollars to spend, which has been touched on multiple times today. That's a common theme. And our lawmakers, it's become a pay-to-play situation. And they are just not, either they're awake to the animal rights agenda, or they're collaborating with our enemies, or they're just ignorant to what this is. So we approach everything with lawmakers at the local, state, and federal level by explaining from a very rudimentary level, and it all falls back and comes back to ground zero, which is ownership of private property, what these deceptive organizations are trying to accomplish, and that is animal abolition. It's the end of animal use of any kind, from the pet on your lap to the steak on your plate. And they truly are the wolf in sheep's clothing. These animal rights organizations prey on people who, well, let's just say this. A lot of lawmakers, which, you know, the legislative process truly is ground zero to protecting your rights. And oftentimes these lawmakers are the judge, jury, and the executioner. I loved the two gentlemen, Representative Humphrey and Senator Hamilton today. Those are my people. They get it. We don't have to worry about them. And the people that are on the extreme other side, and they're devout animal rights, vegan lawmakers, will never be able to convince them. But it's the undecided voter, so to speak, in the middle, in the lawmakers, that we need, all of us need, to inform and educate about what the animal rights ideology is truly seeking to accomplish. We're all for animal welfare, all of us in this room. You live it every day. But they're trying to make us play defense and defend everything we do. And sometimes agriculture isn't pretty. You know, come on over to the day that we castrate cows. Not pretty. Say, you can't wrap some of this stuff up with a pretty bow. But if you get an animal rights activist, they will vilify everything that we do. And we have to stand firm and quit playing defense. So animal welfare endorses the responsible keeping of animals. You know all this. I don't need to go into any of this with you. But animal rights, it is a political agenda. Make no mistake. And it's an ideology based on nothing but emotion and propaganda. And I've been in the hearing room enough with a lot of these animal rights activists to know that they just flat out lie. They come up with, oh my gosh, I've seen it all. Tears, sad stories, you know, the animals are just being, you know, treated horribly, whether they're talking about cattle ranchers or people in the pet industry that raise dogs or other pets, exotic animal owners, horse-drawn carriages, perfect example. They love to talk about how sad the horses look. Rodeo, also in the crosshairs in a big way right now. They can just drum up anything and take pictures out of context to influence lawmakers and voters to sway their way. Incrementally through the years, they have been making headway. So animal rights advocates for the rejection of all animal use regardless of how well they're treated. It's never going to be good enough, ever, for the animal rights people. These are ideologues. I mean, you could have the Taj Mahal. You could have the pristine barn. You could have the perfect kennel. Check all the boxes and do everything. You can even have a perfect inspection record with USDA, state agriculture, local municipal laws. Doesn't matter. They don't care. It's not about being in compliance or law abiding. They just want you gone. And they'll lie and make up things to make that happen. These are ideologues, but they are influencing our lawmakers at the local, state, and federal levels. So we've got to get to the lawmakers and inform them. In Texas, and we keep a close eye on all the local animal rights organizations, In Texas, where we have been working quite a bit in the last 7 years or so with some preemptive legislation and also opposing a lot of legislation in the State House down there, there's a group called Texas Humane Legislative Network. And this slogan is on their homepage: legislate to decide their fate. Whose fate do you think they're talking about? Yours. They want what you do in raising, breeding, working with animals to go away. They want it gone. They want to inflict policy that erodes animal ownership and private property. So they want to do this. Their whole goal is to end all of these things: biomedical research, zoos, fox hunting, companion animals, food animal agriculture, all of these things they want gone. Animal use of any kind. And they're using emotion, pure emotion, no animal husbandry. In fact, somebody mentioned, I think Shad mentioned Measure 16 out of Colorado a couple years ago. It actually wanted to eliminate and change the definition of husbandry practices and take away husbandry practices, whether it's artificial insemination, or he was talking about palpating animals to see if it's pregnant. All those things they consider to be animal abuse. Castration, banding, all those things are considered cruelty. See how they're doing this? It's just incredible. And, you know, I have to mention this too. Sustainability, really? Farmers and ranchers have been sustainable since the dawn of time. And the bad guys have totally hijacked our words, and sustainability is one of them. And we need to go on offense and take that back, because they've made sustainability mean something other than we, who have common sense, would believe it to be. So they're using emotion, not animal husbandry or facts or science, behind legislation and regulatory reform. And by that I mean, you know, things that pass in the legislature or Congress and become, you know, laws that are regulated through USDA or the EPA or all those things. But also there's this lovely process called the rulemaking that USDA loves to inflict on American citizens, which I can get into later, but briefly, it is kind of a joke. I mean, they act like they're doing us a huge favor to allow for a comment period, but they know all the time they're just going to implement it. They're going to implement that rule. So they're using animal husbandry, or emotion, not animal husbandry, to get these things done. And these are the things they're working to eliminate. They're working to eliminate animal confinement, eliminate breeding of animals, eliminate captive breeding and private ownership, while vilifying making a profit. Does any of this sound familiar to you? This is what they're doing. They're vilifying this. I've actually seen every one of these things written into legislation. So this is how you destroy agriculture. By passing these pieces of legislation that then become law or regulatory laws, you raise the cost to do business, to raise meat, milk, eggs, pets, livestock, which then reduces the total production of these things, because a lot of people fold up their tent and go home. They don't want to deal with this anymore. They don't want to deal with USDA or the influx of these terrible laws that create an expense for them to change their facility and adapt their facility to modify so they can stay in existence. And then it weakens the economic structure of animal agribusiness. And as our Commissioner of Agriculture said earlier, you know, this is a national security issue. This is truly a food security issue. All of these things that the animal rights organizations are putting forth. Incrementalism is our greatest enemy. It's one of many. But the animal rights organizations and their agenda, make no mistake, it is a political agenda chipping away incrementally by altering Americans' views about animal ownership and animal use, especially through the media, through our schools, through legislation, even through litigation. We were talking about that at our lunch table just a little bit ago, about how these animal rights groups like Animal Legal Defense Fund and the Humane Society of the United States and PETA, they launch these lawsuits never necessarily expecting to win. They just want to bleed the animal owner or the landowner dry. forcing what we call sue and settle. They just want people to end their animal enterprise, and they want to make sure that it's their demise. So they launch these lawsuits. And it's even been the case where the animal owner or animal enterprise owner wins a lawsuit. Well, guess what happens? The animal rights groups never give up because they've got this huge pile of money. So that's how they operate. So the way in which they are achieving their goals are through the following, one of which is a ballot initiative. So the ballot initiative process is allowed in 24 states in the United States, indicated in dark green. But look at the map on the right. Indicated in red are the states where the Humane Society of the United States has already passed ballot initiatives, 33 to be exact, in these states that negatively impact the pet industry, the livestock industry, animal agriculture, private property. I could go on. Exotic animal ownership, all those things, fishing and hunting, they have been coming at us with ballot initiatives. And the reason that it's a process of getting things through, but the problem with it is they have piles of money where they can influence voters through the media. And it is very powerful. So our side tends to get flat-footed, and we're always playing defense. Why are we always playing defense? We need to go on offense, which is what we learned firsthand in Missouri, but I'll get to that in a second. Here's an example of a ballot initiative you may know about. In 2008, Proposition 2, called the Prevention of Farm Animal Cruelty Act, passed at 63% of the vote. Now, 63% of the vote could have been a very small percentage of Californians actually showing up to the polls. Okay, so it's not necessarily 63% of Californians or even registered voters, but it passed. And we knew when this passed in 2008 that it wasn't about larger confinement, which is what they wanted. They wanted larger confinement for egg-laying hens, veal crates for cows, and they wanted to provide different housing for gestating sows. And in doing that, we kept saying, it's not about bigger cages or bigger confinement. It's about empty cages. That's where they're going. Because remember, it's incremental. So they started here, and gosh, 10 years later, guess what? They came around with, in 2018, with the California Farm Animal Confinement Initiative that mandated all those different aspects of our food producers in California have to be cage-free. So again, going back to that model, it reduces the production. People get out of business. They don't want to deal with the retrofitting. This is crazy. Farmers and ranchers have been food producers have been modifying their operations for years to make things run more efficiently. That included confinement, bringing egg-laying hens into housing. So it makes it dust-free, easier to feed, easier to clean, keep away predators, protect from the weather and the elements. Makes sense, right? Well, to the animal rights ideology, they're driving the policy. And why in the world are we allowing animal rights people to dictate how food producers grow food? This is crazy. The writing's been on the wall for decades on this, and too many lawmakers aren't paying attention, and voters are getting totally bamboozled by the ballot initiatives. Did I do something wrong? Oh yeah, it's all money. All money, I know. So without going into a huge amount of time and detail, because of all of the shenanigans in California, the pork producers at the National Pork Producer Council sued and took all this to the Supreme Court. And it was frustrating to watch the Supreme Court justices because, in my opinion and our opinion at the Cavalry Group, the NPPC did not do a great job of laying the groundwork as to why Proposition 12 even passed to begin with and who brought it forth. Because if you read the comments from the Supreme Court justices after the trial, they were all saying things like, well, we really need to turn to the experts on animal welfare, and that would be the Humane Society of the United States. Why didn't the National Pork Producers get ahead of that? So I hate to be critical of them because they're the ones that, tried to fight back, but they blew it. They missed the punchline. So it was very frustrating. So on May 10th of this year, in a 5-4 ruling, the justices upheld the ruling to dismiss the NPPC's challenge to invalidate Proposition 12. Now, briefly, in 2010, this ballot initiative that came to Missouri, where I was living at the time, my husband and I launched our own campaign because the Agriculture Coalition, including Farm Bureau, and a lot of the associations, they were unwilling to fight back for what they believed was truly about dog breeders. It wasn't about dog breeders. And so Mark and I got frustrated and launched our own campaign to focus on the urban areas, which is where the bulk of the voters are. And we had a very positive result from that. The campaign to defeat Proposition B, as we called it at the time, collectively between the multiple campaigns around the state, including ours, was less than $500,000. But HSUS spent almost $5 million. Remember, they went in there with radio ads and sad, tear-jerking, commercials to try and influence the voters. And this is a great map because, look, the cities, here's Kansas City, St. Louis, the Boot Heel, and I would have to also add in the middle of the state, Springfield and also even Joplin. That's where a lot of the urban voters were. And we just focused on the urban voter to try and defeat this. And we lost by less than 2%. And we believe it was definitely voter fraud. We watched as the things rolled in on election night. We lost by less than 2%. It was crazy. But months prior, just a few months prior, we were losing to their 90% and our 10%. And I will tell you this, having gone through that experience and other ballot initiatives and election campaigns, I can tell you that we are never going to match these activist groups dollar for dollar. But what we have is elbow grease. We have the network of people to make a difference to get this done. We just have to organize. It's a lack of organization most of the time. So this is our economic impact study, which was done in 2012, and it was close to $1 billion loss in the state of Missouri, domino effect financially to the state of Missouri as a result of Proposition B passing. That was even after the legislature took out a lot of the unconstitutional elements out of it. But almost $1 billion. We're talking feed companies, feed stores, veterinarians, pharmaceuticals, kennel companies, transport, and the breeders themselves. We lost 50% of the dog breeders in the state of Missouri. I mean, it's crazy. Again, it follows that model of reducing the producers and eliminating the sources. And Wayne Pacelli, who at the time was still with the Humane Society of the United States, after the first California ballot initiative passed, he comes out and makes this arrogant statement, no surprise there, but he makes this arrogant statement saying, hey, we've got $150 million to spend. We're going to spend it and we're going to keep coming. That's what he says here. Arrogant. But that's what they do because they know they can win with this emotionally charged propaganda. You can go to our website, by the way, and under the Take Action tab, you can see all the ballot initiatives that have been passed. And I don't like to necessarily, promote what HSUS has accomplished, but I think it's important to see because we have to put our dukes up when these things come up. At the federal level, currently, we are in the 118th Congress. And the Humane Society of the United States and another group now run by Wayne Pacelli and Marty Irby, Animal Wellness Action, has several pieces of legislation that negatively impact the equine industry, farm animals, wildlife and exotic animals, the pet industry, animals in research, and of course the regulatory reform through USDA. And I'm going to touch on just very briefly the bills at the federal level that we are watching, because a lot of them we have been making sure that they don't amend the Farm Bill or the FY24 fiscal year 2024 appropriations bill. Scary stuff because there's a lot of negotiating and shenanigans going on in those smoky backroom deals that we hear about, trust me, they go on at the federal level. A lot of favors being exchanged and shenanigans happening like crazy. So, the Prevent All Soaring Tactics Act. We have the Horse Protection Act to basically regulate horses being transported to slaughter, and also to regulate USDA-inspected horse shows that include Colorado spotted horses, Tennessee walking horses, and the racking horses. So you always have USDA inspectors at these shows, and the Horse Protection Act came about in the early 70s specifically to regulate those shows because this practice of soaring was at its peak during that time. And so this came about, and it has been very effective. And to this day, just recently at the celebration in Shelbyville, Tennessee, they've been having success under the Horse Protection Act and have had 98.4% compliance at these shows. Sounds like the Horse Protection Act is working to me, but they want to pass further regulation on the with this Prevent All Soaring Tactics Act, which is also known as the PAST Act, that is very shifty because you have, again, it's all the devil's in the details, because written within the legislation, it wants to remove what they call action devices that they use to train the horses. But tell me that's not going to bleed over into other horse breeds. That's what they intend. They set a precedent to come for more with everything they do. So a shoe of any weight, certain other action devices in the horse industry are, in the crosshairs on this. But again, this does nothing to stop cruelty to horses because, sorry for just being really blunt about this, but those who are in violation of current laws aren't going to change if we pass more laws. I wish our lawmakers would, listen to that, because all it does is hurt the law-abiding people. It does nothing to stop cruelty to animals. The SAFE Act, also a terrible piece of legislation that, like the PAST Act, HSUS has been trying to pass for the last 10 years. And I know, for many who I speak to, this is a very contentious issue. Horse slaughter is something that a lot of people don't like talking about, but I can talk to you about it to say that if they can ban the transport of horses to slaughter, which is what this piece of legislation does, into Canada and Mexico, with a swipe of a pen, they can include all livestock. Because guess what? Horses are livestock. What's going to stop them from including other animals? It's about the precedent. And that's what this would do. I mean, they've already harmed the horse industry with the cessation of horse slaughter in 2007, but now they want to keep coming, and they want to close down the borders into Canada and Mexico and transport. The Puppy Protection Act is a very aggressive piece of legislation that wants to implement limitations on how many dogs you can own, breeding limits, an exercise and socialization mandate. How is that going to be enforced? Just wondering. Are they going to have a little USDA, camera in your kennel, or it's just crazy to me. And a rescue mandate. They want dog breeders, if you're a commercial dog breeder, they want you to take your retired breeding stock and they want to mandate that it goes to an animal shelter or rescue. The federal government's going to tell you what you can and cannot do with your dogs. The FIGHT Act. This is called the Fight Inhumane Gambling, and that's supposed to be high risk, not height risk, and Trafficking Act. And this is moving quite briskly through Congress right now. And basically what this does is, under the cloak of things that are already illegal, dog fighting and cockfighting are already illegal in most states. But what they want to do is use that smokescreen to pass this, which, this is a doozy. You want to protect private property? We need to kill this bill. Because what it does, it gives authority to USDA or the Department of Justice, allowing them to intervene and obtain discovery on your facility or farm or ranch. And it also allows for authorities to take your land and property, legalizing civil asset forfeiture under the Patriot Act, which was another road to hell paved with good intentions. Legaling civil asset forfeiture of not just one's animals, but their physical land and property where the alleged activity took place. The other thing this bill does, if you own a bully breed dog or you own a game fowl rooster, they will profile. I mean, if you get the nasty neighbor next to you who, let's say you had got into a riff with your neighbor, they're going to use this against people. They'll call the authorities to say, I think my neighbor's involved in cockfighting. Why? Because they own game fowl. There are many people in the state of Oklahoma that raise game fowl. And can you imagine being profiled for the animals that you own? But that's what this does. Wayne Pacelli is on a tear to come after people who raise game fowl, not just in Oklahoma, but across the country. J.J. Humphrey alluded to that today. He didn't get into this, or maybe he did. Maybe, did he bring up this bill? I thought maybe he did. Scary thing is that the House appropriations, ag appropriations, in this effort to get the Farm Bill passed and the FY24 legislation passed, funding passed, they provided $1 million of funding to USDA to enforce this piece of legislation. Now, we can still stop it because it's on the Senate side now, but we have got to stop this, the funding of this terrible bill. Goldie's Act basically refers to a unfortunate circumstance with somebody who was not in compliance in the state of Iowa. So they're using that as their platform to set a precedent to get this bill passed. But again, this is just a very onerous piece of legislation that would impact USDA licensed people in the pet industry. And it would take it back to Obama era enforcement by USDA. And I know this has been talked about. And I really am grateful to our agriculture commissioner here that spoke this morning, because I love what she said about, she's not in favor of more regulation. And she doesn't like the federal government having such a stranglehold on people and producers and animal owners in the state. And that was just music to my ears, because, we've got enough. We've got plenty of anti-cruelty laws across the U.S., and they just keep coming with more and piling them on. It's ridiculous. But when I say we're back to Obama-era enforcement at USDA, I really mean it. We lived through those 8 years with Obama, and USDA was, Andy listened to me many times on the phone about what they were up to. They are very heavy-handed through their inspectors and their inspection process, and oftentimes they will work to, we have proof. We have recordings of inspectors admitting that they were told by higher ups that, they've been told to write people up for direct violations and indirect violations that would force them out of business. This agency, and that's the other thing, USDA is a huge agency. There's over 4,000 employees at USDA, way too big. And under the USDA umbrella, there's other organizations like FSIS, which you're familiar with, the Food Safety Inspection System, and then there's APHIS, the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service. And under APHIS is Animal Care, and this is a tiny little agency, and it's worrisome to me because a lot of people who are licensed by USDA will just fall through the cracks because nobody knows that they're licensed by USDA, and USDA is very heavy-handed with everybody who's licensed by USDA under animal care. And so we work every day at the Cavalry Group to hold them accountable, to make sure that USDA doesn't make stuff up that's not in the Animal Welfare Act or the Horse Protection Act for that matter. But that's what they're trying to do. They lie. We've seen it endless times. The Animal Cruelty Enforcement Act, another stupid bill that basically wants to weaponize the Department of Justice by having an animal cruelty task force within the DOJ. So it just keeps going. Can you believe? Farm System Reform Act wants to basically eliminate confined animal or concentrated animal feeding operations. And this gets into the details of wanting to tell people how many livestock they can own, how many dairy cows you can own, how many goats you can own. I mean, it literally lists numbers of how much livestock. It's crazy. And I know that, you know, I personally am very much in favor of country of origin labeling, but it can pass on its own merits. It's a great idea. And as a consumer myself that does all the grocery shopping, I always look at the labels. Even, you know, with produce, why aren't we doing this for meat? And I know that it was riding on this, but I'm not a fan of this. I'm not a fan of that part of the bill. It's just awful. And it's animal rights driven. And so you can go to our website, once again, under the drop-down menu on the Take Action tab. We list all the federal legislation there that we're campaigning against. State legislation, I'll go quickly here for time's sake. I'm bringing this up because this is important. This was years ago in 2016. The elephant guide ban passed, Senate Bill 716, in the state of California, of course. By the way, this is the granddaughter of a member of ours in Florida holding the elephant guide with their elephant. Yeah, the elephant looks really scared of the elephant guide, right? So, but the animal rights groups passed a ban because they couldn't just come up with a piece of legislation that we're going to ban direct contact with elephants. So they banned the tool, just like they're going to try to make plans to ban spurs, certain bits, the bucking strap, leashes, tether. I mean, it's all there. This is stuff that we fight every single year in the state legislative session. And so the elephant guide passed, and our member and their elephants had to move to Texas from Riverside, California, where they had a multi-million-dollar facility outside of Riverside. And they had to pick up all their elephants. And can you imagine moving elephants several states away to Texas? So they settled just outside of Austin in Fredericksburg, Texas. And lo and behold, it was in 2019, just as we were trying to get one of our preemptive bills done in Texas. And I get a call from the elephant owners from California that moved to Texas. And she said, "You're not going to believe this, but my state rep just called, and HSUS is coming here with an elephant guide ban." Fortunately, it was tabled, but we know they'll come back. They'll certainly try. But the reason this is important, here's the elephant guide. Look how similar it is to the show stick. They could easily pass something to stop 4-H kids and FFA kids from handling their livestock at exhibitions. It's all unconstitutional. I mean, and one of the things, we read so much legislation, and the bills that we oppose, if you go to flip back to several pages, it's never about the thing that the title of the bill says it's about. If you go back several pages, it's about private property, because most of the bills that we oppose take away due process, such as this bill that passed in several years ago, 2016, I believe, SB 1001, basically criminalizes dog and cat breeders for simply meeting at an off-road halfway point to transfer a kitten or puppy. Why would they pass that? How dumb. It turns your neighbors into snitches. Can you imagine rolling up into the Walmart parking lot, and if you see somebody handing off a cute puppy to somebody, and then you've got Gladys Kravitz over here dialing up animal control, you know, give me a break. That's what these things do. It turns us against each other. This bill, fortunately, was tabled, but it's worth mentioning because it included this language in the legislation. In the case of a pending criminal violation of alleged animal cruelty, this bill stated that the prosecuting attorney can file civil action forfeiting one's animals before the disposition of the case. That's a total violation of due process. This is happening in states all over the country. All over the country. Every single state legislative session. North Carolina, this was tabled, thank goodness, but this one is another example. It violated due process by allowing confiscation of animals without probable cause and no witnessed affidavit to obtain a warrant. Wow. Pretty bold. Pretty bold. Iowa, similar situation. Violation of due process, allowing the displacement of one animals before any disposition of the animals that were confiscated, and they're responsible for the care and keeping until they have their day in court. Well, that's not fair. They just stole all your animals and you're still responsible for keeping them and paying for their feed. And they gouge animal owners on this too. During the legislative session, you can find all of that on the Take Action tab, drop-down menu, state and federal law or bills. This is an example of our flash map. You hover your mouse over each state and one of the dots, and it'll pull up the legislation with hyperlinks so you can read the bill, see the status of the bill, read the testimony that we provided. We work really hard to provide a lot of information for everybody during the state legislative times. So now getting to the local stuff, and this is where it gets really interesting. And I'll go quickly. I know we're running out of time here. Local ordinances, I can tell you without a doubt, with complete certainty, while I am a huge proponent of supporting local government, I'm here to tell you it has been hijacked. Activists are running for positions on city council. When I say activists, I mean extremists. Animal rights and environmental extremists are taking positions at the local level, planning and zoning, city council, county commissioners. It's been crazy. And in our theater of war, so to speak, with the animal rights movement, it has been exhausting for the last 14 years, going at the local level, testifying in opposition to all of these things. Limit laws, pet sale bans, horse-drawn carriage bans, rodeo bans, animal exhibition bans. Can you imagine banning animal exhibition from fairs? Well, it's happened in the state of Maryland, in Montgomery County. They're trying to pass rodeo in Los Angeles and in San Diego. They're trying to pass horse-drawn carriages all over the country. Exotic animal bans. I mean, it has been insane. It's just been this firestorm. And our group has had a front row seat to this terrible tyranny that has taken place by these animal rights extremists. And just recently in the city of Ojai in the state of California, they voted pretty handily to give elephants human rights. So we have this linked on our website, and I could definitely go into that more, but for the sake of time, we can talk about that later. But this is not an eye test, and there's no way you can read this, but I just want you to see the magnitude of this. This is 24 states, 78 local municipalities, where the Humane Society of the United States, Animal Wellness Action, and other animal rights groups have successfully passed bans on all the things that I just mentioned: pony rides, camel rides, elephant rides, horse-drawn carriages, animal exhibition, the circus. Rodeo actually was banned in one little city in the state of Missouri. Good grief. So this list was the impetus for our group going to a lawmaker in the state of Missouri who was a friend of mine, and I said, okay, we got to go on offense. This is getting dumb. Can we put together a piece of legislation that stops this? We need to stop this. So we came up with the Working Animal Protection Act, which really threw a lot of lawmakers at first because it sounds kind of squishy. It sounds kind of, fluffy, like something the animal rights groups would put forth. And it really bamboozled a lot of people. And we got a lot of support. We never got it done in Missouri, but guess what? Our lawmakers here in Oklahoma were the first to get it done. In 2021, House Bill 1620 passed. It also passed the Working Animal Protection Act. Well, I'll jump to, hold on. Let me skip this slide because you've already seen this. Solutions. Okay. I'll get to more to the Working Animal Protection Act in just a second. But in fighting legislation, guess what? You're the expert. not these computer jockeys and desk jockeys, these animal rights extremists. They don't know anything about animal husbandry. Why are we letting them push us around? So you have to show up to committee hearings. If there's a bill that you're needed in the state legislature or at the local level, you've got to show up because you're the expert. And if you don't show up, then the extremists are going to be the ones making decisions for your land, your property, your animals, your livelihood. You have to show up to the microphone. We show up on behalf of our members, but if everybody were to show up and have it be standing room only, trust me, the lawmakers will be on our side. That's how it's supposed to work. So don't wait for when there's legislation to oppose. Get to know your lawmakers now. Show up to testify for these bills. We help our members write testimony, just so you know. Congressional recess in August is a great time to meet your federal representatives and senators when they're in town. The whole month of August, they usually come home for recess and have town halls and meetings. It's a great time to take advantage. But make sure you talk about your animal enterprise, the difference between animal rights versus animal welfare, which I've passed out, the leaflet that we give to lawmakers. You all have a copy. You're welcome to take more. Find out if they've co-sponsored any animal rights-driven legislation and hold their feet to the fire. We can't put up with that. There's no compromise there. Either they're helping the animal rights groups or they're working to defeat them. Are they running for re-election? That's always important. And don't forget about the website opensecrets.org. You can go there and see who your federal representatives and senators are taking money from. And oftentimes it's very disappointing because you'll see that they're taking money from animal rights and extremist groups. So hopefully you all received a copy of this. You're welcome to take a copy of this if you're into true conservation, private ownership of animals, forwards conservation of species, right for your rights, and go on offense legislatively. The Working Animal Protection Act has passed in Oklahoma, Arkansas, and a version of it in Texas this year. So it was, again, Oklahoma HB 1620. And just because animal rightists say they care doesn't mean they know anything. You know, they can care all day long. Doesn't mean a thing. Like I said, I've heard every, testimony from the animal rights groups you can imagine. The tears, the stories from their brownie troop taking a trail ride, and it was life-changing, and these animals are sentient beings, and they don't deserve to be slaves. It's just like, give me a break. So stay calm, stick to the facts, and the lawmakers eventually start to realize that they need to push away from these people because they're unstable. I've seen it time and time again. We just have to be the cooler heads. Are you trying to say something? No, go ahead.
Well, Tracy has his presentation.
Is he ready now?
No.
Oh.
I think
Okay.
But anyway, they can go and
Oh, yeah.
but he mentions one elk,
Oh, yeah.
and that goes along with the elk rights. And my little granddaughter at school, and one elk, he'd already heard it. So that's whether or not distinguishing
Yeah.
animals from people.
Well, what it does, the animal rights industry diminishes the sanctity of human life. I mean, if they want to hold animals higher in value than humans, which we've all seen it, it's happening every day, it just grosses me out, honestly. So, this is what we're up against. And so many people are falling prey to that, touchy-feely, feel-good thing. And we can't allow for that. So remember Curly from City Slickers? So he always had that one thing. Well, here's my one thing. If you take away anything from this presentation, because I realize I just spewed a lot of legislative stuff at you, we have to defend the Constitution to protect our God-given rights. That's what all of this really boils down to. If we don't support the Constitution, we're done. The cornerstone of the Constitution is ownership of private property. our founding principles. The cornerstone is the ownership of private property. Anti-communism. We are pro-private property. Without private property, we're done. And our founders told us that. They warned us. I mean, they were worried that they didn't go far enough with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights to protect ownership of private property based on their experience. You know, the king owned everything. They'd already experienced the tyranny that we're seeing now. And that was what motivated them to protect private property in the new land. And here we are, a republic if we can keep it. And that's why we're all here, because we're working to preserve our republic. And our framers knew that if we lose private property, our country would collapse. And the Constitution will only stand if we defend it. Government's not going to do it. That is for sure. So these are our rules at the Cavalry Group. Never compromise on issues of private property, ever. Never collaborate with those seeking your demise. Ever, ever, ever. You know, there are organizations out there, they're a dime a dozen, and some of them have great names and they sound like they're there to be the savior. Be careful. Be careful, because some of them are definitely wolves in sheep's clothing. Question anyone who is against our constitutional principles, and always question the premise. All the bills that I showed you today briefly have set a precedent to come for more, and they're all about that. And if they lose one year, they'll just keep coming. We have to be ready to not only defend it, but I'm all for going on offense. It's a lot more fun to go on offense. So be thinking about bills, resolutions, things that are a solution. I mean, the Constitution is the highest law in the land. You would think that would do the trick. But unfortunately, we're having to pass laws to protect our constitutional rights. That's where we are today. Pretty wild. And I'll leave you with this saying from Ronald Reagan, which is my favorite. If some among you fear taking a stand because you're afraid of reprisals from customers, clients, or even government, please recognize you are just feeding the crocodile, hoping it will eat you last. Incrementalism. Thank you all. Thank you for having me.